Let me ask you, when was the last time you went all in on something? Not because the numbers made sense, not because someone talked you into it, but purely because it felt worth it, something that had a certain weight to it, and you just went. Cervantes wrote about a man like that, Don Quixote, an old gentleman riding a bony, half-dead horse, holding a rusty lance, and he sees windmills turning in a field. His servant Sancho Panza is shouting beside him, "Those are windmills, they're just windmills." Don Quixote turns, looks at him, and says, "O great windmills of life, I shall do battle with you 300 times over." Everyone called him a madman, and every time I read that, I feel something I can only describe as envy, because that kind of charge, that slightly ridiculous, romantically stubborn way of meeting life, it gets rarer the older you get. This episode, we're taking that spirit with us to Spain. We'll spend time in Barcelona, the city planning, the architecture, the fashion, and a couple of places worth your time. Then we'll grab a last-minute flight to Mallorca, hike into a valley looking for a beach no one could confirm existed, hitchhike back out, and end up on the terrace of one of the most quietly beautiful hotels in the Mediterranean, drinking a very good mojito on almost no money. Welcome to Zenith Massif. I'm Lou. You can think of us as a concierge for new perspectives, the stories and adventures hidden in plain sight, and the kind of unrefined taste that doubles as an investment. Before we get into Barcelona itself, let's sit with Don Quixote for a moment. The novel is funny, absurd even. The premise is a country gentleman who has read so many chivalric romances that he loses his grip on consensus reality. He puts on a rusted suit of armor, drags his simple-minded neighbor Sancho along as his squire, and rides off to be a knight. In his mind, a crumbling inn is a castle. A pair of local women are noble women in disguise. And the windmills are giants, monstrous and threatening, and they must be fought. The world laughs at him. But Milan Kundera made an observation that stayed with me. He said that the moment Don Quixote left his house, the old world, the one built on absolute truth and fixed categories, ceased to exist. In its place came something richer, a world full of ambiguity, uncertainty, and possibility. A modern world, our world. Those of us who've spent years in the modern world, surrounded by risk models, due diligence, probability-weighted outcomes, we know how to read a situation cold, and that's valuable, but there's something Don Quixote had that no spreadsheet will ever capture. The ability to look at ordinary life and see something worth fighting for in it. He wasn't blind to reality. He just chose to define it on his own terms. Barcelona, it turns out, is full of people who did exactly that. To really understand Barcelona, you have to start with the shape of the city. Look at it from above, on Google Earth, or from a plane window on approach, and you see something unusual. A vast grid of city blocks stretches across most of the urban area. Regular, almost metronomic. But every single block has its corners cut off at an angle, so every intersection, instead of a standard cross, becomes a perfect octagon. This is the example, the expansion, and it was designed by a civil engineer named Ildefons Cerdà in the mid-19th century. The context matters. Barcelona was industrializing fast. People were flooding in from the countryside. The old city, the dense medieval core, had become genuinely uninhabitable. At one point, it had one of the highest mortality rates per square kilometer in all of Europe. Cerdà looked at this and said, "This has to be rebuilt from scratch." What he produced was radical for its time. Those cut corners at every intersection weren't decorative. They opened up the sightlines at every crossing, let light and air move through the city, and created something no one anticipated. When steam trams arrived decades later, the octagonal intersections gave them a perfect turning radius. Cerdà had calculated for it 100 years in advance. The original plan also had buildings on only two sides of each block, with the other two sides left open as communal gardens and green space. Commercial pressure eventually filled most of those courtyards, but the underlying generosity of the idea is still there in the width of the streets, the quality of the light, the feeling of openness you don't get in most European old towns. Walking through the example today, that spaciousness is real. The city breathes. Cerdà had Don Quixote in him. He walked into a committee room in the 19th century with a plan that had never been tried and told an entire city, This is how we're going to build. They thought he was mad. He was right. 150 years later, millions of people walk those intersections every day. We walked almost everything Gaudí left behind in Barcelona: Casa Milà, Casa Batlló, Park Güell, and finally the Sagrada Familia. Each one, going in, we thought we knew what to expect. Each one found a way to be more than that. The standard description of Gaudí is biomimicry, nature's forms translated into architecture. Stone that grows like bone, walls that move like water, no unnecessary straight lines. All of that is accurate, but what I find most compelling about Gaudí is his sense of humor. Look at the rooftop of Casa Milà, the chimneys. He designed them as armored crusaders, or as alien sculptures erupting from the earth, some of them with an almost gingerbread quality at a distance. These are chimneys. Their job is to vent smoke. He was teasing the city. Who decided that functional things have to be boring? Who decided that because something's on the roof, out of casual sightline, it doesn't deserve attention? Park Güell is even better for this. The famous serpentine bench, the great lizard at the entrance steps, the columns in the hall, all covered in a mosaic of broken tiles, shattered coffee cups, smashed ceramic plates. Gaudí literally went to tile factories and collected their waste. The technique he developed from this, called trencadís, became one of the most influential visual art forms of the 20th century. What began as a budget constraint, a solution to having no money, became something permanent. A few years ago, Louis Vuitton staged their cruise collection show in Park Güell. The runway ran through the undulating stone colonnades, modern tailoring moving through Gaudí's organic geometry. The collision was extraordinary. The best houses understand how to choose a space, because real taste doesn't announce itself. Put the right thing in the right context, and it speaks for itself. The Sagrada Familia is finally, after nearly a century and a half, approaching completion. They're projecting the 2030s for the last towers. Gaudí took over the project in 1882. He was killed by a tram in 1926, with less than a quarter of it finished. He knew he wouldn't see it done. He knew this before the concrete was even poured on most of it. And yet he poured his greatest concentration of effort into the details. The decisions that craftsmen and architects he would never meet would have to execute decades after his death. He left the blueprints. He left the logic. He trusted people he didn't know, with something he'd never see completed. There's a particular kind of belief in that. Going in, I'll admit I had some resistance. I've been inside a lot of European cathedrals, Notre Dame before the fire. They're all extraordinary, but they all generate the same emotional register, a crushing sense of scale, darkness, stone. They make you feel small. The design is intentional. You're meant to feel the weight of something larger than yourself. The Sagrada Familia does something else entirely. Standing in the nave and looking up, the first thought isn't sacred, it's, this looks like a forest. The columns branch at the top like trees. The vaulted ceiling opens like sunflowers. On one side, the stained glass is cold morning blue. On the other, warm afternoon orange. The light in there is constantly moving, constantly changing. You don't kneel in front of something above you. You breathe inside something that's breathing alongside you. Gaudí did something bold here. He took the traditional grammar of sacred architecture, restraint, gravity, the suppression of joy, and replaced it with something that celebrates the diversity and vitality of life. Most great churches are designed to be solemn. The Sagrada Familia makes you feel glad to be alive. It baptizes you in an ascending rhythm. I like Gaudí's version of God. His God smiles at life. Barcelona's approach to clothing is unlike Paris or Milan. It grew out of something much more elemental: beaches, sunlight, and football. The Mediterranean climate does something to how people dress. Linen, cotton, espadrilles, worn with a kind of ease that isn't laziness, it's confidence. On match days, when Barca has a home game, the whole city turns blue and red. Everywhere, cafes, markets, the strip. That particular fusion of sport, daily life, and aesthetic sensibility produces a kind of unself-conscious confidence that you can't manufacture. It comes from living in a certain amount of sunlight. Now, something genuinely interesting is happening with Zara in Barcelona. They've recently opened a new flagship on Diagonal Avenue, designed by the Belgian architect Vincent van Duysen. Van Duysen described his intention as creating a space where people would want to pause, observe, and discover slowly. A residential sense, he called it. Rooms you move through rather than aisles you scan. Walking in feels nothing like walking into a Zara. The space is vast, but the density of product is low. The fitting rooms are designed as walk-in wardrobes, with soft lighting and sliding wooden doors. The whole thing reads as gallery, or high-end private apartment, rather than fast fashion retailer. This is a deliberate repositioning signal. Marta Ortega, who now runs Inditex, has been pushing the brand upmarket, collaborations with Ludovic de Saint-Cernin, Fashion Week caliber guest lists for openings, and anniversary events that the industry covered as genuine moments. Below them, Shein and Temu have collapsed the low end. Above them, the luxury houses have been pricing themselves into a category that's increasingly alienating even their natural customer. Zara is moving into that gap, not with product, but with space and experience, with the sensibility of the room. Barcelona carries a personal memory for me. Years ago, when I was younger and the budget was genuinely tight, I stayed in a small guest house in the city. The hosts were a couple, a Taiwanese woman and a Spanish man. What surprised me was the husband's Mandarin. Not conversational, fluent, the kind of fluency you build over the years, with texture and tone. He even had a quality to it that I'd only ever heard from people who learned the language in Taiwan, a particular warmth in the rhythm. That evening, we sat in the guest house living room, drinking a fruit wine he'd made himself from a Catalan recipe, and he talked to us, in Mandarin, about the Catalan independence movement, about the Franco years when the Catalan language was banned outright, about the time he spent backpacking through Asia and where exactly he'd met his wife. The strangeness of that evening has never quite left me. The disorientation, in the best sense, of sitting in Barcelona, listening to a Spaniard explain Catalan history in a language he'd learned on the other side of the world, because a woman he'd fallen in love with happened to speak it. In every era, across every distance of language and culture and geography, if the frequency is right, people find each other. They cross oceans, they learn languages, they stay. The most memorable thing about any city is never the landmark. It's that moment when a stranger's story intersects with yours in a way you couldn't have planned. A few practical recommendations, starting with food. Agreste Mar is worth making a reservation for. It's in Port Vell, the old harbor, on the ground floor of Hotel Serras. The chef, Fabio Gambirassi, is Italian, trained in Michelin kitchens in France and Italy. He came to Barcelona and opened the original Agreste with his partner Roser, up in the hills above the city, where they earned a Sol Repsol, the recognition in Spain's equivalent of the Michelin system. While that restaurant is being renovated, they moved the kitchen into the Serras Hotel. And what started as a temporary pop-up has since become a permanent residency. The cuisine is Italian and Catalan, but that description flattens it. It's not fusion in the sense of mixing things together for novelty. It's more that both traditions share a deep respect for the quality of the ingredient, and Fabio works in the overlap. A starter of Pulian tomatoes with capers from Pantelleria, both imported directly from Italy. Nothing here is for show. You're sitting by the water, with views across Port Vell, watching the light change over the old harbor in the evening. Fabio has a clarity about what he's doing that's immediately apparent in the food. No molecular theatrics, no concession to trend, just a very precise idea of what belongs on a plate and the discipline to keep everything else off it. 2 hotels in Barcelona are worth considering, for 2 different moods. The Mandarin Oriental Barcelona sits on Passeig de Gràcia, which is the right address. Walking distance to the Sagrada Familia, Casa Batlló, Casa Milà. The interiors are by Patricia Urquiola, the Spanish designer, and her aesthetic is exactly right for the city. Warm, precise, never loud. The Restaurant Moments has a Michelin star, overseen by Carme Ruscalleda, whose restaurants collectively hold 7 Michelin stars. One detail that stuck with me. The bar's ceiling was fashioned from the original bank vaults found in the building when it was converted. Once you know that, you can't unknow it. The Almanac Barcelona is near Plaça de Catalunya, walking distance to the Gothic Quarter and the Example. It positions itself as a 5-star for what they call the new generation of traveler, which I read as someone who knows exactly what they want, has no interest in being overserviced, but won't accept less than very good on any detail that matters. Velvet headboards, rainfall showers, in-room tablets, smart controls throughout. The The rooftop bar, Azimuth, has a plunge pool and a 360-degree view that includes the Sagrada Familia. The distinction between them is real. The Mandarin carries the full weight of the traditional Grand Hotel. Impeccable service, a certain formality, the sense of being properly looked after. The Almanac is lighter, more contemporary, and suits a trip where you want quality without ceremony. Different journeys call for different houses. In the second half of the trip, we decided to improvise. We bought last-minute tickets to Mallorca. Barely looked anything up before we left. The island is more varied than people expect. The north is dominated by the Serra de Tramuntana, a UNESCO World Heritage mountain range, steep and ancient, with passes that drop abruptly to the sea. Further south, the terrain softens into farmland and long beaches. The coastline is deeply irregular, full of coves that appear on no tourist map and have no amenities, accessible only by foot or by boat. Mallorca does something to time, not in the obvious sense. Sunsets and holidays slow everything down. It's more fundamental than that. The island seems to operate on a different scale entirely. An hour there doesn't feel like an hour anywhere else. That quality is genuinely rare now, and genuinely worth seeking out. One afternoon, we heard about a wild beach somewhere at the bottom of a particular valley. No markings, no path that anyone could confirm. Just a direction and a general idea. We went looking for it. We followed a barely marked coastal path down into the valley. The terrain was rough, dense scrub, loose stone, no clear trail. The further we went, the quieter it got. Just footsteps and occasional wind. And then the doubt arrived. The way it always does when you're far enough in that turning back feels almost as uncertain as going forward. A small animal working through the patience. Are we going the right way? What if there's nothing down here? How long have we been walking? We turned the last corner of the valley, and the view opened. A bay, crystal blue, absolutely transparent, the water the color of something you'd have to invent if it didn't exist. A handful of people already there, arrived by sailboat, lying in the sun, talking quietly. No hurry anywhere. Someone swimming, someone reading, no one looking at a phone. All the sweat of the walk became, in that instant, the exact price of what we were seeing. That's the Don Quixote thing. Not that the windmill turns out to be a giant. It never does. It's the act of charging. It's what you find when you turn the last corner of the valley that you would never have found any other way. We sat by the water, watched the light move across the surface. Sometimes that's enough. We looked at the path we'd come down. We looked at each other. The answer was unanimous. We were not walking back up that. No bus, patchy signal, not much cash. We stood at the side of the road and did something neither of us had ever done before. We stuck out our thumbs. A car stopped fairly quickly. 3 young travelers, smarter than us, they'd rented a car before coming down into the valley. They were generous about it, drove us around to the other side of the ridge, played good music the whole way, and we had one of those easy, open conversations that happen between strangers who will probably never meet again and have no reason to perform for each other. Very pure, irreproducible. That evening we arrived at Cala Daya, which is where you find Belmont La Residencia. Daya is a village of about 600 people on the northwest coast of Mallorca. 3 sides mountain, 1 side Mediterranean. Robert Graves lived and wrote here for decades. Painters, sculptors, poets came and didn't leave. It's the kind of place that does that to people. La Residencia is built from 2 16th and 17th century stone manor houses, with honey-colored walls, pale green shutters, set among olive and citrus groves on the hillside. Richard Branson bought and converted it in 1987. It passed eventually to Orient Express, and now to Bellman. The property has a restaurant, El Olivo, built inside a medieval olive mill, where 33 original works by Joe Miro hang on the walls, and dinner is served by candlelight. There's a sculpture garden throughout the grounds, resident artists, and regular painting and ceramics classes, not as amenities, but as the actual texture of what the place is. We had almost no money. We couldn't stay there. We walked in anyway, found a table on the terrace that looked out across the whole valley to the sea, and sat down. We ordered a mojito. A good mojito is worth understanding. The margin between a good one and a mediocre one is almost entirely in what happens in the first 30 seconds. Fresh mint, and it has to be genuinely fresh, aromatic. You place the leaves in the glass with raw cane sugar and freshly squeezed lime juice. Then you press very gently, not crush. You're waking up the essential oils on the surface of the leaves, not grinding the veins and releasing bitterness. The difference is the whole drink. Then, good white rum, crushed ice, stir upward with a bar spoon to integrate everything, and a measured splash of sparkling water to close. The one on that terrace was made correctly. We sat there as the sun came down behind the Tramontana, turning the whole mountain range amber and then deep red. The terrace, the breeze, the light going off the sea. We weren't guests, but that terrace, that view, it belonged equally to anyone who was sitting there. That's the thing about certain places. They're generous to whoever shows up. That trip had two places we ran out of time for. Formentera and the small island just off its northern tip, Isla Espalmador. Formentera is the smallest and least developed of the Balearic Islands. Getting there requires a 30-minute ferry from Ibiza, and that friction is exactly why it stayed the way it is. No major resort infrastructure, limited access. The beaches are among the whitest in the Mediterranean, and the water, people describe it as the closest thing to Caribbean transparency you'll find in European waters. It's the kind of color you look at and briefly doubt what you're seeing. Isla Espalmador is even more remote, a nearly uninhabited island north of Formentera, reachable on foot at low tide. It has a natural warm mud bath on the beach. The visitors are almost exclusively people who arrive by private boat, swimming in clear water, lying on the sand without a plan. That particular form of doing nothing, expensive to reach, simple once you're there, is genuinely hard to find. We didn't get there this time. That gap has stayed on the list. There's something I've come to think about unfinished travel itineraries. Clearing the list entirely on any given trip leaves the next trip lighter, less pulled by obligation. Keeping a few things deliberately unfulfilled means the desire stays alive. The anticipation is part of the experience. It gives you a reason that isn't manufactured. Looking back at the whole trip, Cerdà drew his octagonal intersections in the 19th century and waited, without saying anything, for the tram system to arrive and prove him right. Gaudí turned factory waste into a visual language that outlasted everything around it, and designed chimneys as armored knights because he saw no reason why they shouldn't be. The Sagrada Familia has been under construction for over 140 years, passed between generations of architects who never met the man who started it, and it's almost done. We walked a valley in Mallorca half convinced there was nothing at the end of it, and found the best afternoon of the trip. Life will keep putting windmills in front of us. The move, the only move that stays interesting, is to put on the sunglasses and charge anyway. What's your favorite beach? Any moment from a trip that stayed with you? We'd love to hear it, and we'd especially love to see you in our Substack community, where these conversations continue. Next episode, we're talking about the quintessential British mode of transport, Bentley and Aston Martin. Until then, mix yourself a mojito. Do it properly.